Welcome to the F It Bucket, a podcast exploring the realms of cybersecurity and our daily human interactions with digital innovations. I'm Alex Gallegos, a systems administrator, and the rumors are true. I'm alive. I'm here. I'm flesh and blood. I'm a real boy.
I'm Ashley Keski, a cybersecurity specialist.
I'm Paul Ruffalo, a cyber consultant that still doesn't know what he wants to be when he grows up.
And welcome to our third episode in what will hopefully be a long series of episodes. And today we mainly wanted to talk about cybersecurity terminology, why it's important, what does it matter, what are some common terms that people mainly get wrong, sometimes get wrong, and we'll do that. But first, we had a couple of news stories that came up that we wanted to talk about. I wanted to come in right away with a couple that I saw. This first one from NPR talking about how schools are becoming a really common, we'll say, attack site for cybersecurity incidents because, for the most part, they have outdated computer systems. They are really reliant on technology, but they don't usually have cybersecurity experts on staff. They pointed out that they saw in 2022 approximately 45 school districts suffered cyber attacks of some kind, and then that number more than doubled in 2023 to 108 school districts that suffered attacks.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I know.
Is that the transition?
Huge surprise to everybody on this panel, I'm sure, that this is the case. But I thought it was an interesting thing to point out, not only because I knew there were a lot of cyber attacks against schools. I don't think I realized that there had been quite that many. I don't think that, certainly some of these are not getting the news coverage that I would think they deserve. I don't know about the rest of you. Maybe I've just had my head in the sand and I haven't seen as many of these show up in the news. I know there were a few high-profile cases, but I don't think I've heard about 108, that's for sure.
No, and it does seem like they keep them pretty quiet, and I don't know if that's intentional or...
Well, I mean, some of it probably has to do with the nature of the school. And I'm sure state and Fed government probably has a play in it as well. I mean, it's similar, like sometimes you do hear about accidents and stuff on the news, but they don't disclose who was involved for whatever reason. So
sure,
maybe at the same time, it could be above the capability of a lot of the reporters that are on the beat. I mean, they might look at it and be like, well, this is number 30 of however many we've had this year. How many times can we report the same thing?
Yeah, and that absolutely makes sense. There does come a point of diminishing returns, I suppose, where something, I kind of hate to say it, but stops being newsworthy, especially if you're not one of the students or one of the family members who are affected. Obviously, we would expect those people to be disclosed to in the event of a cyber event, but yeah, it's just, I don't know. There's something that really rubs me the wrong way about somebody going after PII specifically for children as opposed to for adults.
And was it mostly K through 12, or were there any colleges listed?
I didn't see any colleges in this particular article. Mostly, at least the scope of this article is superintendents at the K through 12 level. Although I know that there was at least one major incident last year. I can't remember where that was. Does anybody remember off the top of their head?
Mm-mm.
I don't, but a quick Google search, I see it's like the University of Missouri in August of 23, and September of 23, the University of Georgia.
And I think, Alex, to the point about, targeting quote-unquote kids, I don't know that they're targeting those humans as young individuals. I think they're targeting the space because it's an easy target.
Yeah, that's
Outdated
fair.
systems, blah, blah, I can get access to this information. It's supposed to be controlled in some certain manner, and therefore it's easy for me to, exploit and basically move on and rinse, lather, and repeat.
Yeah, probably their two biggest entry points are probably vulnerabilities and weak passwords, I would imagine.
The students themselves probably seem pretty open to phishing and whatnot. I have heard stories of some students, they're handed iPads, tablets, laptops that are issued by the school, and those poor IT people at the school have a hard time keeping them locked down because it's the first thing some kids try to do is figure out how they can get around the controls that are in place. Well, I want to play, solitaire or whatever on this machine when I'm in class. I'm going to figure this out. So
that's where you take that skill set and you put them in an IT class.
Exactly. Like, okay, we're going to use this skill.
Well, I would certainly hope that those accounts are being provisioned with least privilege in mind, and that even if somebody does gain access to a student-level account, that there's not a clear path of privilege escalation from, I have little Billy's account that gets into a network share and an email address, and hopefully that doesn't get me direct access to administrative systems, but we all know that that's not always the case either.
Yep. Agreed. Reminds me of as COVID was killing the world back in 2020, it was interesting to kind of watch how the end of the school year went in the spring of 20, where you had everyone scrambling to figure out how we're going to wrap things up and then just get to summer. And then at least locally, I feel like we wasted the summer because I have a lot of friends and family that are teachers. And at the tail end of the spring, the complaint I heard was, I'm an educator. I am not a content creator. I am not a news reporter. I am not an IT professional. I don't know how to run Zoom, and I don't want to. I want to just teach my kids. And then you get to the summer, and they were offered next to no help. And you get to the fall, and it's the same problem. They're being forced to not only teach these students, the content that's important, but also play troubleshooter when a kid can't get their camera to work, or this, that, and the other. And it was pretty troubling. It should be nice if more of those things were invisible and just worked.
Mm-hmm.
So I really feel for the folks that are responsible for hardening and locking things down and basically doing the things that should be done without becoming a hurdle.
Yeah, for sure. All right, kind of our main topic for this episode, Paul, I think you were the one that kind of spearheaded this idea of kind of laying the groundwork of what some of our terminology actually means in the cybersecurity space. Because I think there are a lot of terms that get used somewhat interchangeably, which probably should not. And a lot of terms that probably get used in the wrong context, which same problem, different side of the same coin, basically. I know one you definitely wanted to bring up was the idea of information security versus cybersecurity. What's the difference between those ideas? What do they mean? Etc.
Yeah, so I like that it's the topic of an episode because this might cause people to have an episode, like I just did there for a second.
There you go.
Anytime you talk about semantics and language and whatnot, and sometimes if it's not in a space that people understand, be interesting what kind of debate we get our listeners into. So, Yeah, I mean, I'd seen a lot of things through LinkedIn and other social media posts that just, it suggested that information security and cybersecurity are distinctly unique, and that, one guy said, "Don't get me started. I don't want to have to go down that rabbit hole again." And I read that and I thought, okay, that might be interesting for the three of us to debate, and then kind of turn it to our listeners to say, is there a difference? If there is, does it matter? If there isn't, then can we just close the book and move on? Or, kind of see where maybe the three of us kind of settle on how we want to take it forward. Maybe I change my intro, and maybe I'm an InfoSec consultant and not a cybersecurity consultant, or I don't know, or an information assurance consultant. We want to throw that in there too. So where should we start? Ashley, would you want to start with a formal definition, or Ashley's definition, or?
Yeah, I pulled a couple of formal definitions that made sense after I read them, and I can definitely see where there's confusion and interchangeability between these two terms. So cybersecurity involves the safety of computer systems and everything contained within them, including the digital data. Information security is more the safety of the information in all of its forms, whether that's stored on a computer system or not.
So do we want to add a third variable in this too, I guess, where network security is sometimes talked about as well, in how we define these things?
Oh, throwing wrinkles in. I like it.
Yeah. Because for me, network security, I feel like we're talking about like physical hardware of sorts,
right,
or even virtual, whether that's a WAF, a web application firewall, or a firewall in general.
Mm-hmm. So I think if we look at, I guess, two of the most trusted resources for, I guess, laying the baseline and then laying the groundwork for definitions in the industry. One of those being SANS. And SANS is an acronym. It's SANS. SANS standing for Sysadmin Audit Network and Security, also sometimes known as the SANS Institute. And then also NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. So while we all like to use Google to research information, I certainly wouldn't want to cite Wikipedia or some other maybe non-monitored sources for definitions. So SANS actually has a graphic that kind of shows how these things interrelate, and we'll have that on our website that shows that. So if we talk about information security, cybersecurity, and network security, technically, network security is a part of cybersecurity, and then cybersecurity is in turn part of information security. Some of the references and some of the research and experience that I saw, information security really is where all this started, back when information was still physical in nature. So you're talking printed file cabinets, written down in notebooks, all those kinds of things. And then when we got into the digital age, that's where cybersecurity became more of a quote-unquote thing. And I almost feel like even before cybersecurity, we might have been talking about network security, because when you talked about interconnecting computers and interconnecting a network, then you had to think about, well, things are now digitized and they're not just sitting in Margaret's file cabinet in the back room. They're stored somewhere else.
I was just going to add on that it was a great segue to talking about network segmentation or access controls and protecting that data and making sure least privilege access is in place.
And we've talked about that concept of least privilege a couple of times this episode. Just really quickly, for somebody that might not be super familiar with technology terms, cybersecurity terms, what do we mean when we say the principle of least privilege?
So that'll be someone only giving you access to the data that you need to see. or edit.
Yeah. No, that sounds good to me. I had a friend of mine in IT land that used to say pretty much exactly the same thing, except he phrased it as nobody gets access to nothing they don't need. And that sounded catchy, but it had a couple too many double negatives for me to be able to comfortably parse it.
And given that this is a semantic conversation, I think that we should also add need to know into that conversation. Because when you look at access and making sure that people can access information that they should or shouldn't be able to access, then need to know is also relevant, I guess, in that conversation. So if you look at, I guess, the way that we'd have to pivot that to say, I guess, when you talk about principles, least privilege, and then need to know, am I right in thinking that need to know comes first and then least privilege comes next, if there is an order of that? So need to know is I have access to what I need to have access to because I need to know. But then once I have access to it, least privilege determines what I can do with that information.
I would agree with that.
I'd say that's fair. Yeah. Let me make sure I'm understanding what you're describing. You're talking about maybe I need to know the information, but I don't need to be able to edit it, change it, delete it. I just need to be able to read it.
Correct. Or I guess even more generic terms, let's say that Ashley's in legal, I'm in finance, and Alex, you're in IT. Well, if you're in IT and you're federating access and doing all that stuff, you probably have access to everything. In a perfect world, I would make sure there's ways that you can't access my legal information, because you really just should not have access to it because you're not part of that team.
Yeah, like you have the administrative privileges to allow access, but you yourself don't have access.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, and that gets into, what does the account that you're logging into your machine and checking your email with and logging onto your primary computer should ideally not be the same account that you're doing administrative tasks with, for sure. You should at least have 2 levels. A lot of organizations are looking at 3, sometimes even 4 levels of access, depending on what their administrative users need to accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
Are you talking like multiple users for an admin?
I am, yeah.
Yeah, so I think getting back to InfoSec and cyber, the difference between the two, I think, the way I look at this is if you're, I guess, at the macro level, it may not even be worth anymore trying to differentiate the two, because we're not in an era or in a space where information is just print or just digital. It's a combination of the two. So I, at least the way I'm wrapping my arms around this, and when I talk to people, is that to the general public and to folks that maybe aren't practitioners or, aren't in technology or in security in any way, shape, or form, I think bundling them together, in my opinion, is perfectly fine. Go ahead, Alex.
See, I think that makes sense in terms of the conversation, especially among industry professionals, but the hierarchy that you shared makes a lot of sense to me, especially in a world where we're telling people that there's more to the way you safeguard and protect your information than just the way you keep your digital hygiene and clean up after your digital footprints. Like, it's also about what information do you give to people that you don't necessarily trust or to strangers. It's about what information you disclose about yourself, either in digital systems or in person, because that information might be used as the security key to reset a password of yours, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's more information that exists about all of us that we should ideally be conscious of that has nothing to do with how we use digital systems and technology, or that is related to how we use digital systems and technology, but like it's not just a technology issue, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like these things still exist and are still things that we should be aware of and concerned about in meat space, skin to skin with other human beings.
Mm-hmm. So I think, I guess kind of settled that in the industry and for practitioners, you can define information security, you can define cybersecurity. For that matter, you can define network security. I think now that we're in the cloud age, network security becomes even broader than it was before. Because even Ashley, you mentioned before that you thought of that as like physical network devices and gear, which even in the cloud, it still exists. But even to practitioners, that line between physical and virtual is very blurry. As we're getting to the point where very few practitioners in smaller markets, and even in larger markets, actually have hands-on that gear. They're just relying upon data centers and other providers for that gear to function.
And I think maybe the way to sum it up when we think in terms of practitioners and people that are in the industry is nobody is going to, knock on wood, hopefully, nobody is going to create a cybersecurity plan and then when a bad day comes in the future, say, oh, well, we had a cybersecurity plan. Nobody said anything about an information security plan. I think everybody is thinking in terms of when we put together a cybersecurity plan, we mean to encompass all of these areas. But when we're talking to individual people, maybe that don't work in the security space, don't work in the IT space at all, which we certainly hope is a significant part of our audience, there's definitely a distinction to be made between these two ideas. Similarly, we talked about, is there a distinction between data privacy and data protection? And I think it's kind of the same song, second verse there. There's absolutely a difference between privacy, what's allowed to be shared, what's confidential, what isn't, versus how data is actually protected in the event that something unideal happens, like it did in the case of the school districts we were talking about, or any other number of enterprises. It's getting to the point that it's like not if you suffer a cyber incident, it's when you do suffer a cyber incident, how bad will it be?
Mm-hmm.
And data privacy is, who has access to that data, right? And the protection part of that is, your policies and tools that are in place to restrict access.
Mm-hmm. Who has access in terms of data privacy? I would say who has access and who are they allowed to share that data with? Like which third parties? Like for better or for worse, whenever I think of privacy issues these days, I think about Facebook, I think about Twitter, I think about Amazon, I think about all sorts of big tech organizations. Does privacy mean the same thing to those giant tech companies that it does to me and you and people that we know and care about?
Yeah, so I think, for me, I guess as I think about this more, because it really wasn't something that was on the top of my mind until I saw folks starting to have that debate, like I said before. So I still look at all these things as in the same pool, in the same sandbox, whatever analogy you want to create. But when I look at, as an example, information security, if that is the broad stroke, and then cyber and network are part of that. And then for that matter, data, privacy and data security are in that as well. I mean, at this point now we're using information and data as terms that are interchangeable, right? So we can really get into this alphabet and semantic soup. So when I look at information security, though, I really look at that as less technical and more policy and objective based. And as practitioners, we've all heard the term the CIA triad, right? It's taught in a lot of entry level classes. It's taught in certification classes, and ultimately, it's the objective of a good, mature program. It's confidentiality, integrity, and availability. You want to make sure that you're handling all those things as appropriate for your industry, for your customers, for your employees. So I feel like information security and data privacy are focused really more on that, adhering to the CIA triad and making sure that that's taken care of. And then when you go one click deeper into the technical aspect of it, that's where I kind of look at cyber, and for that matter, network. And I would then also say data security, which then we get into the semantics of what the hell is the difference between information and data. And again, I think that there are folks out there that say that those are not the same thing. And my brain isn't prepped to have that conversation.
There's another conversation that you're not prepped for because it's not on our agenda, but I know you have thoughts and feelings about it. Do you consider cyber as a technical role? Is it part of the IT department in a well-organized company?
I would say no. I think for me, the appropriate alignment is at the executive table, because given the fact that it's 2024, and even if you are not a company that is selling technology, 99% of the companies worldwide are tech-enabled. They're using technology in some way, shape, or form. And that needs to be protected and governed no differently than your legal documents, your personnel, your human resources, your finances, and your money. Therefore, I can't embed he or she that will protect that asset within said asset. I need someone outside that to act as the transcendent governing body for that asset. Now, could you embed it in HR or in finance or in legal? Possibly. I guess it depends on what level of autonomy and what level of authority they're going to have. Ideally, I would align a security practitioner, right alongside your CIO or CTO. And, they then, if they can't get along or they can't figure something out, then they each escalate to the CEO and get things hammered out that way if needed. But it's troubling to have it embedded in technology, because you're going to end up having either maintenance or feature releases or innovation or what have you take precedent over maybe what controls need to be in place. And there is a happy medium there, but I think that they have to have autonomy and their requests of senior leadership. And then if they can't make a decision together, then someone else probably needs to help and come in and solve that conflict if there is one.
I would agree. There was a time where I would have actually disagreed with you, but I think that comes from my background in network engineering and managing that network security and believing that needed to fall under IT. But I think there does need to be that division and check and balances.
Yeah, it's difficult because it feels very much like a technical role, and I think part of the distinction is or lack of distinction might be down to the size of the company. Like, I can very much see security falling under technology in, a very small organization where the technical staff is only 2 or 3 individuals total. Because it might not make as much sense for that role when it's just one person to be up at the at board level, at C level, whatever level they would be otherwise. I think as a organization grows and matures, and along with growth and maturity becomes more complex, then yeah, that absolutely needs to become a role that becomes less about clicking buttons and running scripts and making updates themselves, and more about oversight and making sure that policies are in place. And I think that's kind of natural for organizations to grow and develop and mature from small to medium to large over time.
I also think it's a lot to ask of a technology leader to be seasoned in security appropriately. I have a lot of peers in the space, and one of my really good peers, we were talking probably a year and a half ago, really about me and kind of what I wanted to do, and he had said, "Well, my suggestion for you is please don't go back into traditional technology." He's like, "I think you're doing a really good job where you're at and where your headspace is, and I think it would be wasted if you went back to worrying about how to keep the lights on and how to solve some problem that's been solved by 15 different vendors, and then you're going through bake-offs and things like that." It's like there's people that are really good at that and like it, and let them do that. You need to focus on moving the ball forward from a posture perspective. And I thought that was very relevant and valuable.
Fantastic advice.
And I also look at, in a way, if you look at, maybe some of our listeners remember the Toyota story and how they kind of reinvented themselves by having a focus on quality. It's interesting to think about like a factory, and back in the back in the manufacturing days, you had this concept of quality assurance, and just given the way the factories worked, the quality step happened after things were built. And if you think of a process, well, process typically flows left to right, at least in the States, right? It's left to right, top to bottom. So if you're doing quality at the end, it's already too late. Because if you have a 5-step process, well, step 6 is quality, you then have to figure out where it started. And so if you're not catching it until the end, so it's 5 times as expensive to fix it at the end. And so one of the things Toyota did years ago was, how do we shift that left so we save ourselves time and money on resolving the issue downstream? And what they fundamentally invented was quality engineering, which I prefer because you actually are working on engineering quality into the process along the way versus at the end. And there's a natural ebb and flow into doing that, because you're going to have your production manager focused on churning that factory as quickly as he can or she can to get the things out as quickly as possible. And if you've got this quality guy sitting over top saying, no, you got to stop because this is broken, well, they're going to have a natural conflict. Well, how do you break that conflict? Someone above them gets them in a room and says, how are we going to fix this in a professional manner? Mm-hmm. And that's how I approach cyber and security, is that I want to have that natural conflict between maybe those that produce and those that control. That cannot happen if someone is sitting underneath the production manager or the person that's responsible for turning the factory. Yeah. And if you look at CTOs, that's typically what they're focused on, is churning the factory as quickly as possible. We'll come back and maintain or do refactoring or whatever later. Well, that's not the best way to do it, especially today. We can talk about DevSecOps too. That being embedded in a development group, maybe that's not the way to go. Maybe that should be a shared service across your entire enterprise, and then there's natural conflict there. Now you got us going.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like there's a lot here we could say about Boeing as well.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you look at the acquisition that happened apparently a couple of decades ago, and the first thing that dropped off was quality control. And now the thing that drops off is the planes out of the sky.
That's not even funny.
Is that too morbid?
That might be, but we're not censored, so.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
doors flying off, middle of flights.
I can just smell that Boeing endorsement flying away.
Excuse me, stewardess, are the engines going to remain on during the entire flight or just at takeoff? Well, Alex, you and we remember when we were coming back from Black Hat, we were sitting in Chicago, and our plane that had just came in, we got on it, and they said, this plane can't fly.
Yeah.
And we looked at each other like, it just did. It got here. What the hell?
Sure, that was really comforting for the people who just got off that plane to hear.
Right.
Sure.
And then, so we get on the plane. The pilot turns to the stewardess and says, this plane can't fly, which Alex and I both heard like first person. It wasn't even second person. And we looked at him like, So they took us off the plane. We're waiting by the jet bridge. They moved us down 2 gates. They had already boarded the flight next to us. They took them all off that plane to put us on that same plane to go to Cedar Rapids. And the pilot gets on and he's like, there must be some really important people on this plane because I have never in my 25-year career witnessed an airline deboard a plane to put another group on right away.
My favorite part about that story, other than the fact that it happened at all, was that somebody from the flight that got their plane taken away knew somebody from our flight. And so they get off and she's like, what the hell, Brian? Yeah. I don't think Brian was his name, but it's like, are you stealing our plane?
He's like, apparently. Then, of course, we're looking around like, all right, who's the suit that's not dressed in a suit that works for United or whoever it was? Say, all right, I got to get there. Otherwise, someone's going to get fired.
Yep.
Whoever was in 1A or B. Thank you.
Yeah. Appreciate it. Yeah, because we were looking at renting a car to drive home.
We had one already.
Yeah.
We had one rented because there was someone else we knew waiting, right? Was it?
Yep. We probably shouldn't say his name on the podcast. Just, you know what? I think every story about somebody we knew should be Phil.
Phil? Okay. Yeah. So Phil was going to ride with us.
Yeah.
So do we want to transition into anything interesting that we watched recently?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So, what have you been up to? Or what have you been watching?
That's the transition.
I'm using you saying, do we want to do that as the transition? So,
perfect. So I'll put myself on the spot. You have the idea, you have to volunteer it first, right?
Pretty much.
Well, I hate to admit it, but I've gone down the Cobra Kai rabbit hole.
Oh, really?
I had started it probably a year ago, got through right up to the point where it gets really nostalgic, and I won't ruin it for people that have not watched it. And I thought, nope, the corn factor has gone way too high. And I said corn, C-O-R-N, and stopped. But then over the weekend, I was like, there's a new season, I think, coming out soon, and I kind of want to see what's going on. And I literally just today, I finished the second season. And it is definitely made for TV kind of style, but it's so entertaining that I've enjoyed it.
Awesome.
The fight scenes are next level horrible. there is no kick above one's waist.
Perfect.
Remember the scene from The Office when they did parkour?
Yes.
That's the style that the fighting is. Like, none of the people have any flexibility, or there might be one or two that are somewhat athletic, but I mean, they definitely pick people for their acting abilities versus their physical prowess.
Oh no. Oh no.
So I give it a, 7 out of 10 for those that are wondering.
Nice.
What about you, Alex?
I'm late to the party by about a year and a half. But a friend of mine was like, "Oh, you haven't seen the movie Nope?" And so I watched that this past weekend. And it was, I spent the first 2/3 of the movie going, I don't quite understand what's going on. There's 3 main ideas here that I don't quite understand how they connect. And then there's a moment where everything comes together and connects in a really horrifying way. And it's like, oh, I understand what I've been watching for the last hour and 10 minutes. Oh no. And it gets my approval. It's been a long time since I've seen a movie, especially in the horror genre, that stuck with me for any length of time. And I watched this movie on Saturday, and I'm still thinking about it on Wednesday. And it's not particularly gruesome or gory, but there's a couple of scenes that are just like, oh, that's unsettling in a existential sort of way, and I'm gonna think about it at different periods throughout my day, sometimes when I don't necessarily want to, and okay. And yeah, it gets a thumbs up from me. I recommend giving it a shot.
Paul, it looked like you were about to say something just before I asked.
Well, now I forgot what I was going to say, but given Alex's talk about Nope, that reminded me of one I don't think I mentioned before, which was Talk to Me. Relatively new, released in 2022. It's a thriller, and it was pretty well done. Somewhat of a unique storyline.
Cool.
That has a lot of jump scares and a good ending where it's like, really? Shit. There's going to be a sequel, and now I have to worry about it.
Excellent.
What about you, Ashley?
I definitely don't watch any horror or thriller. True crime all day long, but as soon as it's made into a movie, it terrifies me. I don't know. Doesn't make sense. But I haven't really watched anything lately. I've been catching up on a lot of YouTube videos around gardening, just kind of preparing for spring. Getting a lot of tips and information.
That reminds me of a fun fact my wife and I picked up the other night at dinner about agave and how that grows and whatnot. So I guess for the benefit of our listeners, apparently there are, I think the number is 7 states in Mexico that are quote unquote certified agave locales, where the good tequilas, and I can't list them all because there's a few, but basically those distilleries will only buy agave from those 7 states. If it's grown anywhere else, they will take it, but they'll give you, fractions of pesos versus what they normally would buy.
Interesting.
And I forget, I think it's 5 years from the time that you start growing an agave plant to harvest.
Wow.
Which in the grand scheme of things is nuts, considering, two of us live in Iowa and it's a season every year when you plant to harvest. But I guess in the industry, that's not really too bad. There are, some plants, I think it's olives. They're like a decade or longer.
Wow.
And then grapes, I think, are worse. Don't yell at me, listeners, in the comments, because it's fine. I'm not a farmer, but I don't have the patience. 5 years? Shit. I'd be like, okay, are we done yet? I want some tequila.
Yeah. Who's to say any of us will be alive in 5 years?
Wow.
I mean,
that's not where I was going.
That's just the way I think about these sorts of things. It's like, let somebody else have grown it in the past, and then I will buy the product of their labor, because, the end could be nigh. We don't know. Live in the moment.
This is why I'm not a farmer. It's because I don't have patience to wait for something. Alex, on the other hand, I may be dead.
Yeah, exactly. The
I'll wait 2 months for a cucumber.
Yeah. 2 months, I don't feel the looming specter of mortality. But 5 years, who knows what could happen?
I'm wondering, Alex, did you leave the house today? Like, you're not that guy that stays home and is scared of the sun?
Technically, no, I didn't leave today. But I work from home, so that's not... I got up, I went to work, and then I did this immediately afterward. I'll leave at some point.
That's fair.
Probably tomorrow, but...
But you do work out of the office every now and again, and you're also not the kind of guy that just stays home. You do things.
Yeah, I don't get my groceries delivered. I go places, I do stuff. Yeah.
Okay.
It's not going to become that kind of security podcast.
Got it.
Instructions on how to make yourself a tinfoil hat? No.
So one thing I did want to mention that I forgot, given the fact that we're on recommendations. So we had crafted this episode to be somewhat semantic in nature. And I remembered a book that I read. This was over 14 years ago. And I'm impressed that I have that kind of memory at my 45 years of age. It's called Pull: The Power of the Semantic Web to Transform Your Business. It was published in 2009. It was very, very interesting at the time. I think that there's a lot of relevance still today. And one of the reasons I want to bring it up is when we talk about information security, cybersecurity, all that kind of stuff, my humble opinion is that we could agree to disagree. They might have different definitions because of NIST and SANS and whatnot. There are other people that might say, well, it really doesn't matter because we're all just really trying to protect a thing. And if we get into a semantic debate, whatever. What this book would challenge those groups is that in the realm of communication, especially when you're trying to have systems talk to one another, language matters. And the book brings up interesting things like a smart shopping cart. And that as you put things in it, it has to be able to communicate with other systems for it to be useful to you as a human. And if that language isn't common, forget about it. Same thing financially. Global financial market, well, it'd be really nice if it was one currency. We're not going to get there. So those tools have to be able to translate, a peso to a dollar, to a franc, to a pound, that kind of stuff. And so I think it might be a worthwhile read for folks if you've not heard of it or maybe read it 15 years ago like me. So I'd have to find it because it was actually a hard cover. This was before, Kindle was super cool.
Nice. All right. Well, once again, thanks for taking the time to hang out with us and listen to our discussions and ramblings for about an hour every couple of weeks. And hopefully we'll see you for the next episode a couple of weeks from now. And until then, hasta la vista, everybody. I am off on vacation. Peace out.
Goodbye. We still don't have our outros good yet.
No. The F-It Bucket is hosted by Ashley Keski, Paul Ruffalo, and me, Alex Gallegos. We're edited and mixed by Alex Gallegos. Our theme song is Limit 70 by Kevin MacLeod. So by now you're thinking, this podcast feels like a comfortable old friend, right? Wrong! This is only the 3rd episode, and we could still really use your help. Yes, you listening right now, getting the word out. Do you like the show? Rate it, review it, wherever you get your podcast, because it really helps other people find the show as well. Do you know somebody who might enjoy the podcast? Take this as a perfect opportunity to schedule a weekend getaway to a semi-local attraction, like 3-4 hours away, and then while you're driving, you say, oh, hey, by the way, have you heard this new podcast? You're not asking, you're not looking for permission, you're already putting it on, right? It's your car, you're already outside Uber range, what are they going to do, right? Now, if you want to engage with us in a way that doesn't necessarily involve a minor count of kidnapping, then you can find us on social media. We're on X at the F-It Bucket, that's EFF. Our subreddit is r/theFitBucket, and you can email us directly at theFitBucket@gmail.com. Our next episode comes out on April 11th, and we hope you'll be there with us. But until then, these 3 enthusiastic amateurs with a microphone and a dream are signing off. I knew there were a lot of cyber attacks against schools. I don't think I realized that there had been quite that many.
We're off and running here.
What is
That I don't know what that is, but it comes through in crystal clear HD audio.
Oh, my mic. Oh, I was changing the sound mode because there was some feedback I could see on the app. So
Okay.
That was hilarious.
I couldn't hear it at all.
Well, great.
What does it say? What does my inner monologue say?
Just
Click,
click,
click.
clap, click, clap. It's not often that we get our outro sting done within the first 5 minutes, so that's great.
So you're welcome.
Appreciate it.